Well, we are in the final three chapters of Daniel. They're all one unit, as we said. Chapter 10 was the introduction to this final vision that Daniel has. And in that chapter 10, we saw Daniel praying and fasting. In his prayer, he praised God, he confessed his sins and the sins of his people, and then he made his requests known to God. So good model for us to follow too. God answered Daniel's prayer by sending an angel to tell him about the events that were to come that would affect the Jews. Chapter 11 begins with brief prophecies of the coming Persian and Greek empires. The vision accurately prophesies the short reign of Alexander the Great and the breaking up of his kingdom among his four generals. And the prophecy then focuses on two of those emerging empires. These are the two empires that would directly affect Israel. They're simply referred to as the king of the north and the king of the south because they are north and south of Israel. And so if you'll recall this map, the king of the north was this Seleucid empire, which is the gray area, and also that orange area continuing over on into Turkey. Seleucus captured that entire area and made it a part of his empire. So modern day Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Syria, Lebanon, and often it's just referred to as Syria rather than the Seleucid empire. And then in the south, that purple area, the general Ptolemy went down there and established the dynasty of the Ptolemies. And again, that is often just simply referred to as Egypt. And he had holdings there in Egypt and over into Libya, and then some of the Mediterranean islands as well. Well, for the next 150 years or so, these two kingdoms are at war with each other. And so if you're north of Israel and south of Israel, to fight each other, you have to go through Israel, and that's exactly what happened. So Israel kind of became the fighting ground, or at least the transit way they passed through to fight each other. And so the Jews suffered all that goes with having occupied armies in your territory. And so here's a list of the kings that were described in verses 5 through 20 of chapter 11. And these verses describe many of the details about the battles, the alliances, the political intrigue that took place during the times of conflict between the king of the north and the king of the south. So in the south, in Egypt, they all retained the name Ptolemy and just were numbered sequentially, and sometimes they would add on a second name to make themselves sound better, to bolster themselves. And then in the north, they would either follow the name of the founder Seleucus, or they would pick up the name Antiochus. And there again, they would also add on a name to indicate how great they were, or that they were a benefactor, or whatever. And approximate years of when they're reigning. So the period that's covered here, where it talks about these two empires, is roughly, 320 BC down to 140, 150 BC. So about 150 years. And initially, the Ptolemies were stronger than Seleucus, and they in fact supported Seleucus as he conquered that one orange area that we saw as he reached over and got that. But in time, the Seleucids became the larger, the stronger empire. So each side took turns trying to expand their influence and their territory into the other's lands. Each side also attempted to form an alliance with the other by arranging marriages between the royal families, and that didn't always work out as well as they had hoped. So these battles were fought off and on for 150 years, and then near the end of that time, we also noted last time that Rome was beginning to grow, and they were becoming an influence in the area, and they were beginning to have an effect on both of these empires and their battles and the choices that they made. Well, then last week we saw that the vision changed a little bit, and it focused on one particular king of the north. And this king, we know from history, was Antiochus Epiphanes. He's referred to as the contemptible person. It's a fitting description of Antiochus because the Jews regarded him with contempt for all the evil that he did to them. And Antiochus had nothing but contempt for the temple, the altar, and the Jews themselves. He killed thousands and thousands of Jews. He put thousands more into slavery. He desecrated the temple with what's known as the abomination that causes desolation. Tonight, that prophecy continues to describe the contemptible person, but now there's a little bit of a twist. It now describes the coming of a future contemptible person. So one more note before we get into our passage, and this is a reminder that I put up the last few weeks. As we continue to study, we want to remind ourselves this isn't just about history or interesting facts, but there's a reason that God gave this prophecy. They reveal a God who is sovereign and almighty. He alone is worthy of our praise. Secondly, they reveal a covenant-keeping God who is faithful and does not abandon his people. His mercy endures forever. And thirdly, they gave Daniel and the Jews, his fellow countrymen, the encouragement for the present and the preparation for the future. There were difficult days that were going to be ahead of them with all of these armies marching through their territory. The Jews had been allowed to return to Jerusalem, but they weren't free. They would still be subject to the Persians, then the Greeks, followed by the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Ultimately, Rome's going to come in. So God didn't want them to be unaware of what the future was. All right, so then let's take a look at our last section in chapter 11, beginning in verse 36. And we'll do our overview. So if you would note any important words or phrases, we'll jot them down to kind of guide us into our lesson. Daniel 11:36. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many and shall divide the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. And he shall come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. Okay, so what words seem to characterize this passage? Relies upon himself. Magnifies.
Speak things against God.
Yet he shall come to his end.
Yes. And nobody will help him.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? All right, that's good. Well, looking back at verse 35, we see the phrases, until the end of time and awaits the appointed time. These are the first of many clues that there's a change in focus. There's a time gap between verse 35 and verse 36 of over 2,100 years and counting. We're in that time gap right now. So we've taken a giant leap forward here in this vision of Daniel. Verse 36 still refers to a king, but it is no longer just Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Some of the descriptions given are like Antiochus, but he falls short of fulfilling them. So Antiochus, therefore, is a type of the king that will come, an example or a forerunner, if you will. The king referred to here will not appear until the last days. Daniel's vision showed him near-term history that will be fulfilled in the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The descriptions that follow have no fulfillment in history. They are events that will take place at the end of time. Note the reference to when the indignation is accomplished. And verse 40 mentions the time of the end. So the king being described here is the final human king on earth, the one to be destroyed when Christ returns. Verse 36 tells us four things about this contemptible person. We see these characteristics confirmed in other places in Scripture. First, we see he is self-willed. And we see this in Daniel 8:4. Maybe we would say that he's egomaniacal. He does whatever he wants. He does share this characteristic with other godless rulers like Alexander the Great in Daniel 8:4.
I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him. There was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great.
And then when we read about Antiochus the Great in Daniel 11:16, we saw a similar description there of him.
But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand.
So this one to come does share some things with some of these other mighty kings in this area of being an egomaniac and being very self-willed. Secondly, we see that he views himself as divine. If he will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, then clearly he regards himself as a god. This was also true of Antiochus because he named himself Epiphanes, if you'll remember, which meant glorious or manifest. So he had a high opinion of himself as well. But Paul describes this man also. He talks about this one who is to come, and he calls him the man of lawlessness. We see that in 1 Thessalonians 2:3 and 4.
For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive.
Second Thessalonians.
Oh,
That's 1 Thessalonians 2:3-4, which is what I just read.
Yeah, it should be Second Thessalonians.
Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction.
So, verse 4.
yeah, that's the right one. That's right. Yeah, sorry about that.
Verse 4 too, though, to make your point.
Yeah.
4:2.
No, the next verse.
Yeah, verses 3 and 4.
3 and 4, so that's 3 and 4. Oh, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God.
Yeah, so that's a description of this, as Paul calls him, this man of lawlessness, this one who is to come. He's going to elevate himself as being divine. Thirdly, we see he's a blasphemer. He will speak astonishing things against the God of gods. We saw some of this in Antiochus Epiphanes when he profaned the temple. John also writes about this in the vision that he sees in Revelation. Somebody has Revelation 13:5 and 6.
And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven.
And the fourth thing we see is that he will be successful for a time. He will prosper, but God has determined the period of that success. Antiochus, as a type of the one to come, also prospered for a time. John describes him as the man or Paul describes him as the man of lawlessness, and John calls him the first beast to come out of the sea, and that his power comes from the dragon, or Satan. Well, then we see that this contemptible person, this man of lawlessness, will prosper until the indignation is accomplished. The word indignation speaks of fury, and it's used in Scripture to picture God's great displeasure with sin. We see this in Isaiah 30, verses 27 and 28.
God, I just can't see it. Okay, here we go. Behold, the name of the Lord comes from afar, burning with his anger and in thick rising smoke. His lips are full of fury, and his tongue is like a devouring fire. His breath is like an overflowing stream that reaches up to the neck to sift the nations with the sieve of destruction, and no place on the laws of the people. A bridle that leads astray. Is that right? Oh, a bridle. Sorry, I must need new glasses, reading glasses. Is that bride or bridle? Do I
Well,
have to read more? Oh,
no, just those two verses.
no. Sorry.
So a picture there of God's fury and God's indignation, his
Let's go.
great anger against sin. So it's this extreme anger that's roused by something unjust or mean. In the 1828 Webster Dictionary, is defined as the anger of a superior, particularly the wrath of God against sinful men for their ingratitude and their rebellion, and that's what we see here. It can also refer to the effects of God's wrath, which are the terrible judgments that come about. Well, God is going to pour out his wrath on the whole earth during the tribulation. Revelation tells of these terrifying events. It first describes 7 seals that will be opened and bring death to 1/4 of the earth with sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. The sun will go black, and the full moon will become like blood. But this is only the beginning, because then there will be 7 trumpets that will sound, and the destruction brought by the first 4 trumpets is described in Revelation 8, 5 through 12.
Then the angel took the censer and filled it with the fire of the altar and threw it to the earth. And there followed peals of thunder and sounds and flashes of lightning and an earthquake. And the 7 angels who had 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound them. And the first sounded, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and 1/3 of the earth was burned up. And 1/3 of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood. 1/3 of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. The third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of waters. The name of the star is called Wormwood, and 1/3 of the waters became wormwood. And men died from the waters because they were made bitter. The fourth angel sounded, and 1/3 of the sun and 1/3 of the moon and 1/3 of the stars were struck, so that 1/3 of them would be darkened, and the day would not shine for 1/3 of it, and the night in the same way.
So as you notice, these judgments are mainly directed toward the physical creation. The sun, the moon, the stars, trees, and rivers are all affected. Men, of course, are indirectly affected by that, but the primary direction is against this physical creation. So God's wrath, God's indignation to the tribulation is being worked out, but that's still not the end. There's still more to come. Revelation talks about 7 bowls of God's wrath that will be poured out. They will bring painful sores on those who deny God and follow the beast. Every living thing in the sea will die. The sun will become extremely hot and scorch people. The 7th bowl will bring the greatest earthquake the earth has ever experienced. Islands and mountains will disappear. 100-pound hailstones will fall from heaven on people who are still cursing God. After all that, people are still cursing God. Revelation 16:19 says that God will remember Babylon to make her drain the cup of the wind of the fury of his wrath. And then a loud voice in heaven will cry out, "It is done." So when we read in Daniel that this contemptible person is going to not meet his end until God's indignation has run its course, these are the things that are going to happen before that comes to be. The prophet Zephaniah describes some of those times in this way. He talks about this in Zephaniah 3, verses 8 and 9.
Therefore, wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up to seize the prey. For my decision is to gather nations to assemble kingdoms, to pour out upon them my indignation, all my burning anger. But in the fire of my jealousy, all the earth shall be consumed. But at that time, I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech, that all of them may call upon the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord.
So Zephaniah here talks about God pouring out his wrath. It's also a purifying time for the Jews. Zechariah 13, 8 and 9 talks about this a little bit.
In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 shall be cut off and perish, and 1/3 shall be left alive. And I will put this third into the fire, and refine them as one refines silver, and test them as gold is tested. They will call upon my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God.
So 2/3 of the Jews are going to be gone, but the third that remains, God is purified, and they will be that remnant that God sees through. So in this context, the indignation refers to God's wrath that will be poured out on the nation of Israel during the last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week. So that some say that is the tribulation. Others would say that's the last half of the tribulation. The tribulation is referenced to the full 7 years. But anyway, this is that wrath being poured out at the end. And then there's another description of some others alive at that time. This is in Zephaniah 2, 1 through 3. This describes those who are meek.
Gather together, yes, gather, O shameless nation, before the decree takes effect, before the day passes away like chaff, before there comes upon you the burning anger of the Lord, before there comes upon you the day of the anger of the Lord. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, who do his just commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you may be hidden on the day of the anger of the Lord.
So there's a remnant there described as being humble or meek that are preserved, this faithful remnant, this 1/3. And it's also reminiscent of what we saw in the Passover in Egypt. Because there's that sense there that the meek are going to be kind of protected or hidden during this time of the wrath. Isaiah 26, 20 to 21 talks about these faithful Jews again.
Come, my people, enter your chambers and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until the fury has passed by. For behold, the Lord is coming out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, and the earth will disclose the bloodshed on it, and will no more cover its
So the indication there is that these faithful Jews are told to seek shelter and until the end of the indignation, until the indignation has run its course. Verse 36 ends with the phrase, "For what is decreed shall be done." So God is in control of all these events. These things are going to run their course, and even the successes that this contemptible person is going to experience are limited by God's hands. He certainly controls our world as well and the things that seem out of control in our lives. Well, verse 37 says, "He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers." This indicates that he will come from a religious background, or at least his parents were. Note that this was not an accurate description of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. So here's just another evidence that we're talking about somebody else, because he very much did follow the gods of his fathers. He built the temple of Zeus in Athens. He built a temple for Jupiter in Antioch, and he contributed to the rebuilding of the temple of Apollo in Daphne. So he was very much into the gods of his fathers. And as we read last week, he also placed an image of Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the word used here for God or gods is Elohim, so it can't be translated as a plural gods or as a singular God. So this has led some people to conclude that this contemptible person will be a Jew. We can't rule that out, but most commentators think this phrase really just indicates that he's rejecting the religious practices of his parents. Verse 37 also says that he shall pay no attention to the one beloved by women. Now, some would suggest that having no desire for women may mean that he's just devoid of natural affection, or some would even suggest that he's homosexual. Well, we can't be definitive about that, but maybe a better understanding is that this is a statement of the rejection of Christ, because Jewish women often express the desire to be the mother of the Messiah. So one who pays no attention to that is beloved by women is actually rejecting the Messiah. That might be a better way to understand that phrase. It says that he will pay attention to no other God because he will magnify himself above all these other gods. We see and then he will demand the worship of all the inhabitants of the earth as he elevates himself. We see this in Revelation 13:12-17.
It exercises all authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people, and by signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast. It deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both great and small, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name.
So when he comes, he's going to enforce loyalty and worship through this mark that he causes everyone to wear, and they have to have that mark in order to buy or sell. He wants to be the one and only God that receives all the worship. Verse 38 says that while he does not honor the God of his fathers, he will instead honor a God of fortresses. Now, there are varying opinions of what this means and how to understand this, but one is that the God of fortresses can be seen just as a personification of war. So he is going to honor the war and the fighting. He has regard for no other God than war and power and domination that comes from it. He will honor this God with large military budgets and impressive arsenals. Of course, we know for Christians, this is not where our strength lies. This is not where we rely or what we honor. We're commanded to seek our refuge in God alone. We see this in Psalm 20, 6 through 8.
Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heavens with the saving might of his right hand. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They collapse and fall, but we rise and stand up.
There's the contrast, right? This contemptible one is trusting in his horses and chariots, and we trust in the Lord our God. Well, let me just put a footnote in here. You may have noticed I've avoided using the term Antichrist because Daniel doesn't use that term. And in the book of Revelation, John doesn't use that term when he's talking about this person at the end. The only place we see that term used is in John's epistles. In 1 John 2, he says, many antichrists have come, and anyone who denies the Father and the Son is an antichrist. In 1 John 4:3, he says, every spirit who does not confess Jesus is antichrist. And then finally in 2 John 7, he says, anyone who does not acknowledge Jesus as coming in the flesh is a deceiver and the antichrist or an antichrist. So because it's not used, I'm just trying to stick with the words on the pages. The term gets bent around a lot, and people have a lot of different ideas about what it means and who it is. So I'm going to stay away from that and try to stick with the words that are used here in Scripture. Let's see what John says in Revelation 13, 1 and 2. He describes him there as the beast that comes out of the sea. Did I give that to anybody? I don't think I... Oh, you have that? Okay, yeah.
And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power, and his throne and great authority.
So when people use the beast use the term Antichrist to refer to that beast really sounds more like that revived Roman Empire that's coming, and then that one horn on the beast that's going to take power. Daniel's describing a person here. Later on, John's describing a person. So anyway, for all those reasons, I'm just going to kind of stick with the words on the page. Verse 39 tells us that this coming contemptible person will deal with the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god. And this is probably a reference to Satan. He's the power behind this contemptible person that we just read about. This person is going to reward, or maybe we should say bribe, in order to gain worship and honor and loyalty. He's also going to parcel out land for a price. Antiochus Epiphanes did this on a smaller scale. He would manipulate people with rewards and political payoffs too. Verse 40 says that the king of the north and the king of the south will come against him like a whirlwind. This is another sign that we're not talking about Antiochus, because he is the king of the north. He could not come against himself in battle. Now, there's some speculation about who these kings are. Some want to say, well, the king of the north is Russia. And others want to say, well, in keeping with the imagery used here, then the contemptible one will be attacked by Syria and Egypt. So we can't really identify these nations with any certainty. The passage goes on to say that he will respond to this whirlwind that comes at him, and he will overwhelm his enemies like a flood. Now, when you read that, it's a little bit unclear as to who the he is. This is, again, if we take a look at this verse 40, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and many ships, and he shall come. So who is that he? Well, some people say that he is the king of the north who was just described. I think in context, though, that he is this contemptible person. He's going to come into the country. He's going to overflow and pass through them. So when he's attacked with this whirlwind, he responds like a flood. His large army will overpower many countries. He'll also enter the beautiful land. The Hebrew word here does mean beautiful or glorious, and Israel is beautiful because it's the birthplace of the beautiful one, and it's the future place of his kingly reign. We see that in Psalm 48, 1 through 3.
Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God. His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of all the earth. Mount Zion in the far north, the city of the great King. Within her citadels, God has made himself known as a fortress.
Now, one footnote here, it says, almost in passing, that Edom, Moab, and Ammon will be delivered out of his hand. There's really no explanation given here. And these nations are mentioned a number of times in Scripture. And I just think it's interesting to remember the origin of these nations. Edom, of course, is another name for Esau and his descendants. So he's the brother of Jacob. Moab and Ammon, if you recall, were the sons of Lot. If you remember the story about what happened when Lot and his daughters fled from Sodom, Edom and Ammon were the sons that came of that. So in a sense, these Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, they're like cousins of Israel, right? And so they keep popping up, and there's this complicated relationship of these peoples to Israel throughout history. Often they're opposed to one another, fighting one another. Here, for some reason, they're spared from the onslaught of this contemptible one. Verses 42 and 43 say that the expansion of the contemptible one continues. Not even Egypt will escape. He will capture the treasures of Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. He'll capture the treasures of Egypt. And then it says that Libya and Ethiopia, or Cush in some versions, will follow in his train. So the suggestion here is that maybe they're not going to be conquered militarily, but they're going to be impressed with his charming nature and this kind of a charm offensive, and they're gladly following him along. Well, while he's securing this control over North Africa, over Egypt and Libya, he receives some news or some rumors that come from the north and the east. Now, whatever these rumors may be, it alarms him. And so he stops his pursuit there and he turns back. But he comes back to the beautiful land with great fury. So now, though, it seems this charismatic veil of this person has been lifted, and we see a very destructive man is revealed. He's going to leave annihilation and ruin in his wake. Again, this was foreshadowed by Antiochus Epiphanes. So this future king will set his command post between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem, the Holy Hill. This seems to be a reference to the final campaign that takes place in Armageddon. He's assembled a massive army, but is still inadequate. No one will come to his aid, it says. He'll not be able to stand against the Lord of hosts. Well, as we wrap up tonight, let's take a look at a passage in Zechariah that talks about this day. And it's in Zechariah chapter 14, and we'll look at that together. So Zechariah 14, the first 9 verses. Behold, a day is coming for Yahweh when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the city shall go out into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then Yahweh will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. On that day, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azal. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then Yahweh my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. On that day there shall be no light, cold, or frost. And there shall be a unique day which is known to Yahweh, neither day nor night, but at evening time there shall be light. On that day living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea, and half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer and winter. And Yahweh will be king over all the earth. On that day, Yahweh will be one, and his name one. And so that marks what we see at the end of chapter 11. Yet his day will come with none to help him. So his end is sure. And in that we can take hope that the end of God's contempt or God's indignation being poured out. Well, let's have a couple questions as we close. As always, what do we see about God when we look at this passage?
I think of another, I think it's Isaiah when God is addressing the king of Tyre, and it kind of switches from talking about the king to talking about Satan, just almost, you exalted yourself and all these things. And I think even with this passage, the cross references you gave with Daniel, earlier in Daniel, with that self-will, that kind of language being applied to other kings, but ultimately Satan being behind some of these rulers and very powerful figures, which so often, the political landscape is changed by very self-willed and not everyone's Attila the Hun, but just that kind of aggressive, dominate the world, try to conquer kind of people. You can't help but think, there's some kind of demonic influence by that. It gets very overt here in the end times. But it's just a very simple premise that Satan's about, which is self-willed. I want to do what I want to do. I want to get everything I can get, and that's everybody. That's not just those rich people or powerful people. Just I want the fruit. I want to get the fruit. You get the fruit, and then there goes humanity. So just thinking that's the cause of all. It's just that right there. Just self-willed. I want to do what I want. I can give you a riot brief about it, but it's not like I'm that much different or further along.
You can see in the passage that God has decreed events. No matter what man plans, even this willful man cannot stand against God, the Creator.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. He will come to his end. No one will help him.
It's a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the living God.
What's so extraordinary is that it's not fire and brimstone in the sense of how he creates this acquiescence amongst the evildoers, right? It's almost really subdued and so complete. And obviously, 100-pound hailstones are kind of a bad thing, but when you hear about just words destroy this evildoer and that they all go to the wayside without any effort. It's like you kind of dig down into it and scratch the surface. I think, relatively speaking, when you compare it to your own life, like where you went through trials and tribulations, they're nuanced, right? And that's where faith comes in, I think. So that's the continuity. And the faith is truth and it's fact, and it is already written. But it's not like this, you know, applause or like thunderous like lightning, and you know, it's more nuanced than that. It's a personal relationship. At least that's how I take it.
Well, then one more question. This is on the bottom of your sheet too. Why is it crucial that we are people who know our God during times of peace and during times of hardship and persecution?
We have to remain steady through all of these different periods, but even with peace and hardship and persecution.
Sometimes more in peace and secure times, right? I mean, when things are going well, it's easier to, you know, we're more likely to think that, you know, we're on top of things, we've kind of mastered things and we're in control.
I think, well, something's coming.
You never know when times of hardship and persecution will come, so you gotta just always be ready.
Exactly. Things come out of the blue, like in places that
We kind of skipped over the end of verse 39, but he points out that people follow him and they get rewarded for it. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many. He shall divide the land for the price.
Yeah.
Why would they follow him? Because they don't know God of the Bible. They don't know truth.
Yeah, I mean, apparently he's a pretty charming, charismatic fella that attracts people to follow him, and then, you know, he's not above using bribery and payoffs to get his way too.
I was gonna make a comment like sometimes people forget God in times of good and only go to Him when in times of hardship, as opposed to opposite where people know or acknowledge God when times are good and then run when there's times of hardship.
Yeah.
It's kind of odd that both ways there's two types of people.
Okay, any final comments?